You've seen the Nike logo everywhere, on shoes, jerseys, arenas, and every big sports moment. But few people realize the brand built on winning started with a man who couldn't win on the track. Phil Knight wasn't a polished entrepreneur. He was a young runner chasing an idea no one else believed in. This is how someone who never broke records ended up creating the most recognizable sports brand on earth. In the early 1960s, Knight was unknown. He was a track athlete from Oregon who cared more about speed than anything else. He loved the sport, even though he knew he'd never reach the top as a competitor. His coach, Bill Bowerman, understood that drive. Bowerman wasn't only training athletes. He was tinkering in his workshop, cutting apart shoes and rebuilding them in search of small gains. Watching him, Phil realized performance wasn't only about talent, it was about solving problems. After graduating, Knight felt stuck. He had a business degree, but no real plan. One idea from a class paper kept returning to him: the potential of Japanese running shoes. At the time, German brands like Adidas and Puma ruled the market, but Japan had already shaken up other industries. Why not footwear? That question became the seed of his bold idea. So he went for it. With no product, no company, and barely any money, Knight flew to Japan. He walked into Onitsuka, the maker of Tiger shoes, acting as if he represented an American distributor called Blue Ribbon Sports. The catch? It wasn't a real company, but the pitch worked. Onitsuka agreed to send him samples to sell back home. When the first boxes showed up, Phil sold them from his car. At track meets, runners loved them. They were light, affordable, and fast. That imaginary business slowly started turning into a real one. Knight had made his first real move, not by outrunning anyone, but by spotting and opening others missed. Still, nothing about the journey was smooth. Knight was broke, juggling a day job just to keep his dream alive. His office was his parents' basement, stacked with shoeboxes. Orders increased, but cash never came fast enough. Each month was a struggle to keep suppliers paid. Even so, he pushed ahead. He felt he was building something that could reshape the sport. Bowerman eventually joined him as a partner. The two kept refining the Japanese shoes, changing soles and fits based on what athletes needed. That combination of experimentation and practical insight helped Blue Ribbon Sports earn trust among runners. The name was spreading, but the business was still fragile, and Knight's future remained shaky. That tension is what makes the story matter. From that unstable beginning came something huge, built shipment by shipment and risk by risk. It grew from the belief that small starts can lead to big outcomes, that failure doesn't shut the door, and that sometimes you have to act before you feel prepared. And that's how Nike's flame took hold, not through instant triumph, but through persistence, struggle, and a leap into the unknown. By the late 1960s, Phil Knight's small outfit, Blue Ribbon Sports, was staying alive, but only by a thread. His deal with Onitsuka had helped him get started, yet he was still selling a product he didn't control, and deep down, that bothered him. He wanted something that felt like his own, something that matched the grit, freedom, and edge of running. That's when the idea shifted from moving boxes to creating a brand. Then things went sideways. Onitsuka, the company behind his shoes, began talking with other US distributors and planned to shut him out. When Phil learned what they were doing, he realized he had two options: accept the loss or build from scratch. Most people would have backed off. Phil didn't. If his supplier abandoned him, he'd make his own shoes. That moment sparked the real change. He pulled his small crew together in Oregon and told them it was time to start fresh. They had no real budget, no factories lined up, no marketing plan. What they did have was conviction, and that conviction became the start of Nike. The name took time. Jeff Johnson, one of Phil's earliest hires, suggested Nike after reading about the Greek goddess of victory: short, bold, and symbolic. Phil wasn't sure at first, but once he saw it written out, he felt its punch. That's how Nike got its name. Next came the mark Carolyn Davidson. A design student sketched a curved check meant to show movement and speed. She charged $35 for it. Phil glanced at the sketch and said he didn't love it, but it might grow on him. That simple swoosh would later become a global icon. Nike now had a name, a symbol, and a purpose, but still no shoe of its own. So Bill Bowerman kept experimenting. One morning he poured rubber into his wife's waffle iron, trying to build a lighter sole with better grip. The result looked odd, but on the track, it worked. That waffle sole would reshape the future of running shoes. Their first Nike shoe launched in 1972, right as the US Olympic trials hit. Oregon runners tested them, liked the feel, and started talking. The shoes seemed quicker and more natural. Nike wasn't only offering footwear, it was offering possibility, the promise that effort could take you further. Even then, the company was scrambling. Cash was always scarce. Banks were wary. Knight spent much of his time chasing loans to keep the lights on. Employees worked long hours, often for little pay, doing whatever needed to be done. One wrong move could have wiped them out, but they pushed on. They set up shop in garages, made sales calls at odd hours, boxed their own shoes, and delivered them by hand. That attitude, hungry, stubborn, unpolished, became Nike's core. It wasn't about big budgets or cushy offices. It was about people willing to take risks for something they believed could matter. And as the 1970s moved along, Nike began to rise faster than anyone predicted. More athletes wore the swoosh. The name Nike picked up weight. Still, the huge leap, the one that would turn the company into a cultural force, was still ahead, because Phil Knight and his team were no longer building just a shoe company. They were shaping a movement, one that would change the way people saw sports, style, and ambition itself. By the late 1970s, Nike wasn't just another brand. It was gaining real momentum. Still, the foundation was shaky. Growth was outpacing control, and Phil Knight spent most days trying to keep the company from slipping apart. Factories lagged behind demand. Cash was tight, and legal fights kept popping up with suppliers and rivals. Nike was winning on shelves, but struggling on its books. It could have been the breaking point, but instead, it forced them to change. Knight always believed athletes were the core of the business. They weren't just buyers, they shaped the work. So Nike doubled down on building real partnerships. They listened closely, paid attention to what athletes needed, and made shoes that fixed actual problems. That shift opened new doors. One leap came from Frank Rudy, a young designer with an idea most people dismissed: putting air inside a shoe's sole. It sounded odd to nearly everyone. Knight didn't think so. He took the risk, and in 1979, Nike launched its first shoe with air cushioning. It felt light, modern, and unlike anything else. That technology became a defining mark of the brand. But the biggest change arrived in 1984, when Nike bet everything on a rookie named Michael Jordan. Nike wasn't known for basketball then. Converse dominated, and Adidas had the cool factor. Even so, Knight's team saw something rare in Jordan: drive, presence, and raw talent. They offered him something no one else did: a shoe line built around him. That was the birth of Air Jordan. The first Air Jordan broke all the usual rules. It had loud colors and a look the league didn't like. The NBA banned it for not fitting uniform standards. The ban turned into gold. Nike told everyone, "The league can't stop you from wearing them." Kids everywhere wanted a pair. Air Jordan became a phenomenon and pushed Nike into a new level of influence almost overnight. Sales surged. The swoosh started showing up everywhere, on athletes, on billboards, on bedroom walls. Nike's message shifted too. It wasn't only about performance anymore. It was about personality, confidence, and identity. The slogan that later defined the brand, "Just Do It," captured that feeling. Through it all, Knight stayed the same quiet, stubborn founder who once sold shoes out of his car. He knew momentum could disappear if the company stopped pushing, so he kept urging his team to stay sharp. Innovation became the obsession. They kept trying new ideas, testing, failing, and trying again. Some ideas changed the industry, others didn't. They kept moving either way, but success brought hard problems. Overseas factories, worker conditions, and ethical questions started to rise. Critics accused Nike of mistreating laborers. It cast a long shadow over their growth. Nike didn't run from it. They worked to improve standards, released public reports, and invested in better practices. It wasn't quick, but they learned that real leadership means owning the good and the bad. By the mid-1980s, Nike had turned into more than a sports brand. It had become part of everyday culture, a sign of grit, ambition, and defiance. Kids wore Nike not just for games, but to feel confident and bold. That connection was the real power behind the rise. What started in the back of a car had become a global force. And even with billion-dollar deals and world-class athletes behind him, Phil Knight wasn't finished for him. Success wasn't about reaching the top. It was about staying there and meeting whatever challenge came next. By the late 1980s, Nike had gone from a shaky young company to a global force. But growth brought problems. The company was expanding fast. Rivals were aggressive, and trends shifted overnight. Reebok had jumped ahead with aerobic shoes that filled gyms and TV screens. For the first time in a long while, Nike was losing ground. Sales slipped, and Phil Knight felt the strain. Something needed to change, not only in the product line, but in the way the company thought. That's when Nike stopped focusing only on elite athletes and started looking at everyone. The team saw that sports weren't just for pros. Anyone pushing themselves, running before dawn, shooting hoops in the yard, or walking into a gym for the first time, counted. That idea reshaped the brand. In 1988, Nike's marketing group landed on a short, bold phrase, "Just do it." 3 words that summed up the mindset Knight had followed for years. Act, commit, keep going. It wasn't crafted only to sell gear. It pushed people to move past hesitation. It reached anyone who had ever talked themselves out of trying. It turned Nike into more than a company. It gave it a voice. The campaign took off. Nike ads stopped talking about features and started telling stories. Honest, emotional stories of people pushing past limits. Young or old, quick or slow, seasoned or new, everyone could find a piece of themselves in it. The message spread fast, and Nike climbed back to the top of the sportswear world. Michael Jordan kept expanding what it meant to be an athlete, ruling basketball and influencing culture at the same time. Later, Bo Jackson, Tiger Woods, Serena Williams, LeBron James, and others joined in. Each brought their own journey and their own version of Just Do It. The swoosh shifted from a mark on a shoe to a sign of drive. But while the outside world saw a booming empire, Knight held on to a deeper lesson. Nike's rise didn't come from perfect timing or easy wins. It came from trust in the mission, long nights, failed deals, and constant risk. He once said, "The cowards never started, and the weak died along the way." That leaves us. That outlook shaped everything Nike became. As time passed, Nike kept pushing ahead, launching Air Max, Flyknit, React, and other ideas that stretched the limits of design. They leaned into new tech, sustainability, and digital tools. Through it all, the core message stayed steady: keep going. Knight later stepped away as CEO, but his attitude stayed woven into the brand. He had built more than a company. He had created a symbol of persistence. The runner who once fell short became one of the most notable business leaders of his era. His story showed that success doesn't come from being flawless. It comes from refusing to stop when things fall apart. And maybe that's the real power of the swoosh motion. Always pushing, always reaching, never done. That's Nike. So the next time you see that mark, remember its origins. A car trunk full of shoes, an idea that seemed impossible, and a runner who kept moving. Because sometimes 3 simple words can shift everything. Just do it.